Good morning, everybody. It's December already. Christmas time, that time of year where we get to have some fun and see what other things are going on. Why is my thing not live? All right, let me make sure everyone's up and I'm seeing all the feeds. Switch this thing. There we go. All right. Well, good morning again. Is it showing up right now? Yes. Okay. My name's Samantha Mirabal with Milka's application team, and we're doing our Design Shop Talk today to see what questions you might have. So if you have any questions while we're live, type them in on the feed. If you see me looking off to the side, I've got a second monitor set up where I can kind of monitor both YouTube and Facebook to see what questions we have. I did get some feedback that you guys wanted to know ahead of time, at least what's planned to be covered. So the questions we have for today are some Christmas things, how to do Christmas stockings. So we're going to talk about the primer stitch. I'm going to go over the types of stitches that we can digitize in or digitize within the software. So a running stitch, complex, your column stitches, those sorts of things. And then go over pull compensation. We've got a question that's kind of talking about why do we have gaps between fills and satin stitches. So we'll talk about that. And then the rest of them are really Christmas related on primer stitch and how do you put things on stockings. All right, so that's kind of what I know. Now people might type in things as we go, but we'll kind of go from there. So I'll start with the questions that were sent in ahead of time, and again, I'll keep an eye out for any questions that are asked on either of the platforms. YouTube is being a pain at the moment, so let me change it. There. Hey, good morning. All right, excellent. So first question we had was, I need an explanation on the types of stitches. So let's go open up Design Shop and take a look at that. So different types of stitches, when you're going to digitize, right over here is kind of your options for digitizing. Now you've got your walk input. You could also see these here. So walk, manual jump, walk, bean, and decorative, those all fall under this guy right here, which is your walk tool. Then you have different types of columns. So you've got your column 1 and column 2, and then all these single lines. Those are these two buttons right here. All right. And then you've got your complex right here, and underneath that you'll also have your applique. Now, if you're not familiar with your hotkeys, right here are the ones that are pre-programmed in. What does that mean? It's if you like controlling things from the keyboard, you can always, if you want to do a walk, do Control Shift and hit the number 2 on your keyboard, and that's the same thing as hitting that icon right there. All right. So let's start with the running stitch. So a walk input, this is just a straight line essentially. So when you digitize that, left clicks give you straight points, right clicks give you curves, and that will give you a line. If I turn this to 3D and zoom in so you could see it, good morning Lorena, negative 33 degrees. I am dying here at 50 degrees. I literally am wrapped. This is a heated blanket I'm bundled in because I am freezing. So more power to you. Anyway, so right here, walk normal. This is literally, it's going to make a needle penetration. It's going to jump to the next spot, the next spot, the next spot. And that's what's also some will call a running stitch, right? So it's just going to run from one spot to another. It's good for traveling, for fine detail. Now keep in mind, just a walk normal is only one piece of thread in each location, right? So it's not very thick. You're not going to see it. So if you're using it for outline work, you would want to go over it a few times or change it to a bean stitch. Your bean stitch, it looks the same on the screen, but when it sews out, it's going to put however, you see where up here it says bean thickness of 3, that's going to put 3 pieces of thread down at each location. So when it's sewing, how does it sew? It goes forward, back, forward, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it waltzes down the line. All right, so it's always forward, back, forward. It'll put 3 individual stitches, pieces of thread down for each location. All right, good morning. So that's gives you a thicker outline. So if you've ever sewn the one-day design that I tend to bring up a lot, it's one of the standard Melco designs. All those outlines around the birds are bean stitches. Okay. And if you ever want to try something, sew out something and do a, just a straight walk stitch and then do a bean stitching, you notice it looks thicker. You can see it better. All right. So that's one stitch type. Now you also have the option to change this to a decorative. And I'm pretty sure anyone who watches me talk, I think I talk about decoratives every time. I love them. Decoratives, you draw out a line, right? So it works the same. So I would say walk, change this to decorative, and now I draw a line. But all I drew was that weird shape, right? But now look, I've got all these cute little beads. And that's because that's a pattern bead. And there's a lot of patterns that are built into the software. You can create your own. You've got, this horse one is one I created. It's not really intended for curves like this, but you can see. These stars are pretty cool, particularly if they're smaller size. They actually look like rounded dots. I know on some freestanding lace a while back we had some questions on how to do kind of that raised bubble look. This does it. It looks beautiful. Anyway, so that's your decoratives. Now, what other stitch types do we have? We have our columns, which are satin stitches, right? So those are going to be stitches that, similar to this right here, these beads are satin stitches, right? So it's a longer length stitch back and forth. There's no needle penetrations in the middle, so nothing through here. It's just going back and forth, leaving your longer pieces of thread. So that's what you would call a satin stitch or a column stitch. You have multiple kinds of columns. I've got your column 1 and column 2. And we have some, I'm not going to go into how to use each of those. We do have some good videos on YouTube that you can go look. I'll see if Scott can get you the links to the column videos that Nate did on that really go into a lot of detail on using them. But these are variable width columns, right? So if I say, let's do a column 1. Oh, okay. So there. I created a larger version of my bead, right? And it's just satin stitches. It's stitches back and forth. Satin stitches are raised. They stay on top of the fabric nicely, whereas your running stitches kind of have more needle penetrations, which tend to sink into the fabric a little more, okay? Now, another stitch type we have is going to be our complex, or our fills. So fills are just a bunch of needle penetrations that give you large coverage of filling in areas, right? So if I just do a quick complex fill, I'm going to just do a rectangle, draw a rectangle, voila. I have a filled area, and this is just essentially running stitches back and forth until it fills the whole area. How close the rows are to one another is given by the density. All right, so our stitch types, we have our running stitches, we have our satins, and we have our fills. Fundamentally, those are the main ones. Now there's different things you can do with each of them. Like we said, our decorative stitches, you can even do decorative fills, which again, I really love decoratives, so no surprise there. Okay, so you can even do decorative fills. Okay, so those are the main stitch types, and I think that was a question of the different types of stitches. So does that help any? Let us know if not, and we can go over it some more. What else do we have? Is DesignShop compatible with Windows 11? So we do have a FAQ article that we will get you a link for in the comments. Take a look. Scott should get that for us in a little bit. So the short answer is yes. For the newer softwares, you may have to run in compatibility mode, but the older versions, some of them are expected to work. But the real old stuff, you're going to have to play with and see. But definitely the newer versions, you might have to check for updates. But yes, the newer versions definitely work. Okay, and we do have you the link there. All right, can I explain how to make sure we have no gaps between a satin stitch and a fill? Okay, so why that happens can be different reasons, right? So when you're sewing large fills, so if I change this guy back to just a plain old fill, right? So what's going to happen, depending on how well I've hooped, if I have any underlay on there, things like that, embroidery, just in the nature of it, shrinks. To me, it makes a lot of sense why it shrinks. Because I mean, if you think about it, our machines, it's going to make a needle penetration here, and then it's going to sew pretty darn fast over to the side. As it's going, it's pulling, right? So that hole that you just made, so it made a stitch here to sink the needle, and now it's going to pull until it gets over here. Well, that thread's pulling through the hole and it's trying to shift it over this way, right? And then it's going to make another stitch, and then again it's going to drag it this way. So what's your net effect? This whole side is trying to move this way as it's sewing this way. When you're coming back the other way, it's going to be pulling that way. So all these stitches are going to be trying to shift over a little bit. So your net effect is it's pulling in, right? So what that means is if I over exaggerate this, and it's not going to look like this if you do things right, but it's possible your shape could end up, you drew a rectangle, yet when it sews weird, right? It shrinks in. Now, to avoid that, what do we do about it? Well, first off, so I'll get to the satin stitch in a minute. First, we're going to try to prevent as much of that movement as possible. Use good stabilizer, hoop well, and then make sure your digitizing is on point. So what does that mean? That means make sure you have sufficient underlay for what you're doing. If you have this set to none, yeah, things are going to move most likely, right? So if you're not sure what underlays to use, this auto button works really well, all right? If you want to see what auto does for you, right here you have a box with 3 dots. If you click on it, that'll bring up this screen where you can see what it's doing. And let me make this bigger so we can actually see it all. There we go. All right, so this is showing you that, sorry, that's the top stitching. Underlay, that's where we want. Turn underlay to auto. I showed you the wrong one. All right, underlay, auto. All right, and again, there's a box with 3 dots. If you click on it, it will show you what it's doing. So for large fill areas greater than 90, which is what we have, it's going to be doing a fill underlay and an edge walk. All right, the edge walks help secure the edges to stop the edges from moving. Your fill is stabilizing the fabric underneath it, things like that. Okay, so make sure you have good underlay. Now, when you have a satin border on it, so if I take this, how do we create one? Well, of course, I can draw it by hand, or you've got this fun little tool here, change element from one type to another, time saver. If you click on that, I can say, all right, let's add a single line center. Single line center is a constant width column. So I'm going to add that. I don't want to replace my fill. I just want to add a satin border to it. All right. So you can see that went straight in the center, which is good. Now, if you're, let's say rather than that, you set this to properties. I'm just going to go change it. Let's say you made it like that. All right. That means this is line to line with the edge. That's not a good practice in general because remember, embroidery shrinks. So even though you have good underlay, good stabilizer, this is going to come in just a little bit, and then my column stitch over here is going to shrink. And what does that leave us with? Well, that's going to leave slight gaps along here, which is not what we want, right? So making sure you have some amount of overlap is a good practice. I tend to go straight down the middle of my satin stitches. It's a little bit of overkill, but I would rather just not have to worry about it. So single line center. So making sure you have overlap, your satin stitches aren't too thin. So if you've got a 10-point satin stitch, which is pretty darn tiny, not really a good idea. Again, you might want to actually oversize your fill a little bit more. I tend to stick more with 20 points or more. So I've got, 7 to 10 points overlap. Okay. Oh, Nebraska, good morning. All right, let's see do we have any questions typed in so far? I'm going to quick scan this. Stitch, we got the link for stitch types. Fill part, explain the fill, partition info, angle, what does it do? All right, so if I go into the properties of my fill. All right, so we have a fill. We have our density that's set in how close the lines are together. Down here you have some fill info, which is fun. The angle is what direction it's sewing in. That is this dotted line that we see. So you'll notice if I start changing this, that dotted line angle changes. That's the direction it's sewing in, right? So if I change this to 0 or 90, that's straight up and down or straight side to side. Okay, that's literally going back and forth or straight up and down. And then there's everything in between. Your stitch length is the distance between needle penetrations. Partitions, that's kind of an advanced topic. But you can use that to kind of change how this fill looks. There are some preset partitions here. So let's say I go to fill, the preset of 7, apply. Notice the partition changes to 7. And then I get this neat little ribbed pattern on there. Okay, so you can play with these, with how many partitions, and then changing the numbers here, and that's how it's shifting from row to row. And that will kind of change how these look, right? So can always, I like using the presets just because they're easy. But other than that, you can always come over here and go, okay, what does 01, 01, 01, 01 look like? And try different things. Again, that's probably got too long of a stitch there. But that's some things you can play with to try. We have a new comment. Let's see. What makes the thread twist in the eye of the needle when stitching? What do you mean? Like go behind the needle? Where it like loops under? If your active feed's too high, it can do that. If you can clarify what you're asking there, we can get that. Okay, so let's see, what else do we have? Nothing else typed in. Okay. So we covered those. All right, so next question was, you know, it's Christmas season, we have a lot of these little stockings, and with this kind of fuzzy or really furry stuff, how do you manage that? How do you do monograms or names on there that look nice and clean? We had to our applications email, we had this lady here, she owed some out and sent us some pictures, so I just included them because they're beautiful, just to show kind of what you can do with it. So when you have these really heavily napped fabrics, so whether it's fur on a stuffed animal or on these cuffs, or a towel, something that's got a lot of loft to it, you'll notice if you try sewing straight on it, the fur kind of eats your design, right? It kind of overlaps it, makes it hard to see. So how you can manage that is sewing down a primer or sewing some stitches down ahead of time before you put your name, typically in the same color as the fabric, so you don't really notice those stitches. And that way, when you do finally sew your name on it, you don't end up with all that fur popping through between the letters and over them and things like that. So how will we digitize that? All right. Let me make sure no one from Elko is texting me. They're not. Okay. So let's come over here. Actually, I did this one. All right, I'm going to turn that off. So let's say I'm going to do something like this. Okay, so that's the name I want to put on my stocking. And I've got it all set up, but I don't want to have the fur overlapping everything. So a really quick way to deal with this is to go, before I start this, Scott just this week did a fabulous video on the primer stitch. We did link it in the video so that you can see that, but he goes over the primer and the basting stitch and some different applications you can use it for. Okay, so we've got our name. I'm going to go operations. So to get to that, clicked on the name, right click, operations, generate basting primer. Another way you can get to it is up here. Click on it, objects, generate basting primer. All gets you to the same place. I'm going to go to the primer. The offset is how far away from the edge do you want that kind of first layer of stitches to go. All right. 50 works really nicely. If you want it a little bit closer, you don't have a really aggressive fur, it's not going to come over too much. You might want it a little closer. However many points, you can change it. Let's say 30 points. Excuse me. All right, so what that created for me was 2 fills that are opposite directions so that you get this crosshatch through there. And all that's going to do is lightly sew down all that fur so that it can't come around and grab it. So your monogram or your name or whatever you're sewing now will sit really cleanly on top of everything, so that'll sew nicely. All right, and like I said, typically you would want that to be done in the same color as your fabric. Okay, so if it's a white stocking, cuff, you'd sew that in white and then put your name in on top with whatever you want. And it'll sew really nice. Now for setting up your machine, it's typically those cuffs are thicker, so you might want to up your active feet a little bit. Personally, I wouldn't up it too much, but a point or two doesn't hurt. All right, so that's really all there is to it. Again, you can do that with pretty much any design you want, whether it's lettering, different logos, whatever. And you can see you can get some really nice results that way. All right. When I transfer my design to EMT, basically when I transfer my design to my machine, it doesn't want to transfer. I have to load it from the OS. I don't see that error with my equipment. If you have a design that's doing that, if you can send it to applications@melco.com with just a brief explanation, we can take a look at it and see if there's something with the file or get you some help. All right. You can also call service to see there. Okay. Someone on YouTube asked a question that says, I'm having trouble getting a perfect... Oh, I skipped someone. All right, I'll come back. I'm having trouble getting a perfect circle when I stitch out. I'm getting an oval. How do I adjust the compensation? Do I go up or down in value? All right. So it's not necessarily just up or down. So you would want to make sure first off that you're hooping with appropriate stabilizers and all that. Now for digitizing for a circle, all right. So if you have a circle and whatever, I'm going to change my stitch angle to 90, maybe. There we go. All right, so straight side to side. So what you're seeing is something like that, right? You digitize a circle, but it's sewing an oval. All right, so what do you do about that? So just like I was showing earlier, what you would want to do is overcompensate by adding some offset. I like doing it with an offset rather than percentage based, because the percentage based, notice if I do 120%, that's going to be way too overcompensated here, and it hardly overstitches there. So it basically introduces some distortions because it's multiplication based, whereas your offset is just how many points past that outline do you want to sew. I do 2 to 4. 4 is pretty excessive, I will say. 1 to 2 is, maybe 3 is usually plenty. You have a circle that has 2 colors, so you would want to go up in compensation. Going down is going to cause it to shrink more, but more importantly, make sure your underlay is good, right? So for your underlay, either use the auto or make sure you don't have a super large border margin, because that's going to allow it to shrink more. You really want to stabilize those edges so that as it's sewing, it can't move. Yeah, the subject matter in the title, I don't know how we would do that because the title is really short. I know I started this video with a brief discussion of we have a question saying they wish the videos were labeled with subject matter in the title. It's a DesignShop Talk. They're Q&As, so it kind of varies from week to week. I know I did start this week by adding, a description of at least what I knew we were going to be talking about. So, I know we try to go through and add timestamps and descriptions. Oh, if you go to if you can get the link to where all the DesignShop Talk videos are linked on the Q&A section, we'll get you that, because that's a site that you can go back to later, and there's usually a list of topics that were covered on the previous DesignShop Talks, so you can always see them that way as well. All right, what else do we have? The question I skipped on YouTube, getting ready to buy my first machine, top-level software. What YouTube videos do I start watching for the software? So Scott did get you a link But let me show you just another resource that's always available to you. So if you go to melcouniversity.com, links, go to media, and right here, the playlists. So I would suggest with learning how to digitize, start at the top and work your way down. And that'll cover all the, take you straight to the different videos. They're also all on YouTube in a playlist. But, you know, this is just, I like them. They're all organized here. And they also have the ones for the OS, whether you're doing the advanced, the OS being what drives the machine, right? So this is how you run the machine. These here are how you digitize, okay? So those are some great resources for you. We have a question on YouTube. I have someone whose cattle brand is a P with an arrow on the bottom of the stem of the P. How would I do it? With an arrow on the bottom stem of the P, how would I do it? You would just digitize the design. So I assume what you're saying is it's this, but this part of the P is an arrow? Maybe? I don't know. All right, so you can do a column. So column, let's make it bigger. Sorry, I keep on hitting cancel. All right, so I'm just using that to trace. So let's say I've got a single line. I want an arrowhead on it. So I'm going to use a column stitch. I'm going to line it up. All right, so select these two guys, center them. All right, and then maybe I want to put the little fur things, the feather tails on the bottom here, and I'm going to rearrange them because I don't want them on top. I don't like that look. But then I can copy and paste. Copy and paste. That's cool. All right, move this guy down. That's better. All right, and then you want the rest of the P, of course. So let's do a straight section, some curvy part. Generally, you'd be tracing art and not making a mess like I'm doing here. But you'd trace actual art. There. So maybe something like that with this being wider, maybe. And then arrowhead looks silly now, so let's make it bigger. Yeah, I don't know. It really depends on what... Yes, it's an arrow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would get the art, trace it to the design of how it is, and kind of go from there. Depending on what size it is, you may not want to use satin stitches like this. You might want to use some sort of fills. It really depends on what the logo itself looks like and how they want it to look. But, I mean, that's one way to do it, is kind of digitize it around. Just trace the art with the different types of elements. I don't have the bar that has density, stitch, and underlay. How would I put it on my screen? Okay, so if I make it go away. All right, so I made that bar go away. I would go to tool, where is it? View, toolbars, property bar, turn it on, and then I would dock it by dragging it up here and putting it. Okay, so let me do that again. I'm just going to get rid of it. So I think what you're saying is I don't have that property bar up here. So I go to View, Toolbars, turn on the property bar, and then just dock it. And docking it means just pulling it up here until it goes where you want it to go. So question on the P with the arrow, did that help at all? If you've got art that you want to send, I can always pull that up and go through it specifically for you. But I mean, that's it. Really, when you're digitizing logos, it's just a matter of tracing it. Okay. Let's see. What do we have? All right, we covered all those. YouTube. Let me check. All right, so I didn't miss any others. It doesn't look like. Okay. What else do we have? We talked about that. Oh, all right, so that was all the questions I had ahead of time. Anyone else have anything you wanted to talk about today? Well, I've got a captive audience. I'll hang on a second, look at the comments. Lorena, -33 in Alaska. Wow. I'm shaking here at 50, so Florida. All right. I don't see any other questions typed in. So I guess we'll call it a day. I hope everyone is enjoying the season. When you're doing these stockings, I'll do my friendly little reminder. When you're working with clamps, any type of clamp, I've had a lot of service calls within the last week of people knocking heads off machines. Make sure you're closing the arms. Don't leave them up. You leave them up and then move the arms around. You end up knocking the head off. So don't do that. Save yourself the annoyance or scare factor, and close the clamps, close the arms. How do I put a random color change for a circle? A random color change for a circle. What do you mean random? So if you have, you just want to split the circle, is that what you're asking? Okay, so if you want to split a circle, there's a few different ways you can do it. You can select the shape, and what is going? All right, let's see. I've got a shape, I've got different points. I can click on the 2 points. So how do I select multiple points? Click the first one, hold my control key down, click on the second one, and then I can split element at select. No, just changing one color to the next. That's, well, if I have copy paste. So this one's blue, and then this one, I would just come over here and change it to a different color. So now I've got a red one and a blue one. Is that what you were looking to do? Changing colors? Oh, blending. Okay. So when you're blending, so we do have quite a few videos we've done on blending, so you can check those out. We'll try to get you a link to those. But if I come over here into properties, go into effects, you can turn on custom density and turn on blend, hit apply, and then let's give it another color we could actually see. All right, so there. I've got a blue and a purple. So then I like, Nate doesn't do it this way, I do it this way. So you'll notice people do it differently. I like to turn on auto apply and then play with this. I can move it around and see how the blending is changing it. I can add different points, move these around, and, you know, get it to look, see how it changes real time. And you can play with all the different preset ones, whether it's convex. Remember, if you do this one, let's say you want it denser in the middle, not on the edges like this. Well, I can just tell it to reverse, and now it's denser in the middle and lighter on the outside. So you can always play with those. And remember, you also have these fun little effects where you can add different radial effects and things like that. But I like to always just go ahead and turn on the auto apply so I can play with it real time and see what it's doing until I just get the look I'm going for. Okay. Another way you can do blending is to copy and paste. Oops. Okay, well, let's delete that. I wanted this circle here. Copy, paste, change its color. Notice that's not really the best thing to do because I've got two full density things, but I can take this other one and change its density to something much larger and then turn off all its underlay. Turn off. There we go. And you can just do some blending that way with your different shapes. Okay. When you're doing this sort of thing, pay attention to your needles. Where are they? Your stitch lengths. You can change those. So let's say if I change this down to 35, it's something smaller than the layers underneath it because that will help bury those stitches down into the layers below it. Okay, and someone else typed another question on Facebook. Let me go back and find it. Hello, I have to do a name on a loose weave knit. This would be done the same as a stocking. Yeah, so loose weave knits, when you're dealing with those, you want to make sure that you're using, I've seen different techniques done, so I'll say that up front. I've seen some people put like organza underneath or on top, something that's clear and stays with it to help hold it together. I don't personally do that, but I've seen it done. It's kind of a neat little look. You want to make sure you're not overstretching it. And then a good easy one is to do this kind of primer stitch underneath it, because that's going to give you a nice layer of stitches underneath to stop things from falling apart over time, right? So it'll give you a nice layer of stitches that now your top stitching, your name can go on, or whatever logo you're doing can sit on top and not kind of fall away. Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any on YouTube. Looks like we're good. And Facebook. We're good there. All right. Well, you guys have a fantastic weekend. I'm going to be freezing outdoors watching soccer tournaments, so that'll be fun. Yeah. Should be back next week. We'll see what questions you have. You can send them ahead of time to applications@melco.com. You can type them in when I usually post the day before I do the talk on some of the groups on Facebook, so you can always ask your questions there, and we'll see how we can help you. So, oh, someone else typed a question. All right, if your edges are too spaced, what am I needing to change? If your edges are too spaced, I assume you're meaning it's kind of jagged looking, that your stitches aren't close enough together. So if that's the case, like on here, if you're seeing too much space from one thing to the next, that's going to be density. If what you're actually seeing is kind of a jagged edge here, then that would be your underlay. So if they're not close enough, your density is a distance from one stitch to the next, right? Went here to here. So if I take this out of percentage, okay, so 4 points, that means from one stitch to the next, if I measure there, it's going to be 4 points. So if I want them closer together, what do? I lower the number. I'm going to be really ridiculous about this and lower it a lot just so you can see. Now my stitches are way too close together, but it's 2 points from one stitch to the next. So you want to decrease that number to make the stitches move closer together, increase it to make them go further apart. And just to exaggerate that, if I make that 20, you can see 20 is way too far apart. What number should you be using? I don't know, somewhere between, for most threads, let's say most standard 48 threads, somewhere between 3.5 and 4 is usually pretty good. All right. If you're unsure, use auto. Auto works really well. I like auto. All right. You guys have a fantastic weekend. I will be back next week. Till then. Where'd my thing go?